Welcome to this lesson on designing texts, an introduction to print and digital learning media. In learning design, one of the major modalities for communicating to our audience is through text. Whether we're writing textbooks, manuals, books, instructional pamphlets, or websites, we need to make critical decisions about how text should be structured and designed to best support learning. The purpose of this topic is to introduce some major concepts and skills that will help you make better decisions about designing texts for education. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to design a text using page layout software, making careful decisions about text placement, white space, typeface, and color, to design and use an effective writing and editing process that demonstrates good grammar, organization, and style, and to describe and use a publishing process for various file formats, including PDF and EPUB. For the purposes of this course, we'll differentiate between three major types of text depending on how they're published: paper-based texts, e-paper or digital texts, and online texts or websites. It's important to note that these media have very different impacts on how the text is produced and consumed. For example, traditional paper-based texts like books have fixed and static layouts, while digital text can be both fixed and flexible. Traditional texts are read passively, while digital text can allow for more interaction. As well, traditional texts allow readers to always know where they're located within the whole text, while readers can get easily lost in digital texts. The impacts outlined in this table are important when choosing between various text media for your learning design projects. You may want to pause the video now and review the table in detail. For the purposes of this lesson, we'll focus on designing paper and e-paper texts and leave website design for future lessons. Texts might be designed very differently depending on their length and intended goals. For example, you might have bigger texts like books, textbooks, and manuals, and these might require extra features like tables of contents, indexes, and glossaries. You may also have other types of text which aren't as big depending on your training needs, including workbooks for workshops, examples and exercises for training sessions, self-paced guides for learners to work through on their own, reference manuals, handouts, job aids, and so on. Lastly, you may be required to design short texts like newsletters, flyers, brochures, and leaflets for communication and advertising purposes. Depending on which type of text you want to create, you may have different considerations related to how it is designed, written, edited, and published. The remainder of this lesson will focus on these four different stages. First, we'll discuss the basics of design, including how we make decisions about software, layout, and text. As discussed in past lessons, there are a number of different software titles that you can use. For organizing, writing, and editing your text, you can use any text editor that you're used to, like Word, Pages, or LibreOffice. You may also find other titles useful depending on your project. For example, OneNote or Evernote can be used for planning or helping you quickly take notes and grab and organize content from the internet. When publishing ebooks, you can create documents that have fixed or flexible widths. Unlike PDFs, which have the layout of the content fixed on the page, other ebook file formats like EPUB are flexible by allowing text to flow differently in the document depending on the size of the e-reader. Adobe InDesign and Quark are industry standards for fixed-width layouts of text documents, but you can also get by with other titles like the free alternative Scribus or regular text editors like Word, Pages, or LibreOffice. To create flexible-width documents, you can use the same text editors to create EPUB files, although you may need to also work with EPUB software like Sigil to further edit or format them. When laying up fixed-width documents, there are a number of considerations you need to make as a designer. For example, will the text be in columns? How will whitespace be used to separate content, support readability, and guide the reader's attention? What typefaces and font sizes will be used for various headings and body text? Will the text be justified? What colors will be used for various elements? What will go in the headers and footers? How large will the margins be? What will the page numbers look like? How should graphics be sized and placed? And what other visual enhancements will be included to support learning? Many of these elements can be decided using a grid to sketch up your pages before you commit to a design. For example, a grid like this can help you decide if you'll use columns and where they'll be, the size of margins, the size and placement of images, and so on. Here, for example, is a 2-column layout with an image in the top left and a special zone in the bottom that could be used for quotes, a definition, or an activity. And here is a 3-column grid demonstrating how the size and placement of images can be determined during the planning phase. Once you know the general layout of your document, there are a number of decisions you'll need to make regarding how the text looks. You need to make decisions about what fonts to use for different types of text, including regular body text, first-order headings, second-order headings, quotes, figures and captions, emphasis, and so on. When choosing font types and sizes, you want to maximize readability and accessibility, which means that you don't want to strain your reader or increase the effort it takes to decode the words on the page. You therefore need to be careful when using flashy, complex, or script fonts that the reader may not be used to. When choosing typefaces, you should keep the number of different fonts that you use on one page to a maximum of 2 or 3. On the right, you can see an example of a serif font being used for headings and a sans serif font for body text. As you can see, serifs are the decorative embellishments at the end of various letters. If you Google terms like font couples and font pairings, you'll see that there are a number of websites that will give you suggestions for fonts that are complementary or that look good together. When you decide which font pairings you like, you should also make sure that the fonts are free to download on your computer. You can Google free fonts to easily find font databases. If your project is on the web, you can also look for fonts in Google's font database, which has fonts you can freely use in your websites. Another element of designing texts is color. If your text will be printed, adding color can significantly add to the cost of printing, so sometimes only certain parts of the book are selected for color, like the book jacket, cover, or a specific section. Many e-readers and tablets support color, however, so adding color throughout your ebooks can be an easy, cost-free enhancement. Color codes are used by graphic, print, and web design software to find the exact color value you want. When websites were first developed in the 1990s, web elements were given a hexadecimal value to give them a color, which looks like a number sign followed by 6 letters and numbers. The limited number of colors using this system was inadequate, so today there are 2 other common coding systems, RGB and CMYK. RGB looks like 3 numbers between 0 and 255, while CMYK is represented by 4 numbers between 0 and 100. In general, RGB is used for digital publications, while CMYK is used for print publications. It's important to note that many colors do not have an exact match between these coding systems. Just like when you research fonts, there are many websites that can help you find complementary colors for your design. Google color combinations or color palettes and you'll easily find them. If you want to try to find original color combinations for your project, you can also find mobile apps that will suggest colors for you. Some even let you take inspiration from the real world by building color palettes from photos you take of product designs or of nature. Colors can often look different on different screens and different in print, so if you're spending the money for printing your text, you'll likely want to print 1 or more test pages before committing to a color scheme. Now that we understand a bit more about how to design a text, we'll discuss the writing stage, focusing on the writing process, the pedagogical elements in texts, and writing style. You've already seen several design processes in this class, and since you've been through many high school and undergraduate classes, you've likely already seen 1 or more writing processes. A lot of students write everything at the last minute and hand in the first draft they create to meet assignment deadlines. If this is you, you'll need to develop a more proactive and methodical process that will help you create high-quality, professional texts. You can do this by developing and following a writing process that works for you. I've found it helpful to think of writing as a cycle of distinct stages. By breaking up the writing process, writing becomes less formidable and scary, so the first thing I do is I put my planning hat on. I research as efficiently as I can to get a broad idea of what information is available on my topic. Then I map out my ideas quickly with pen and paper. Then I find and follow good examples of the type of text I want to create to give me inspiration and guidance. Next, I put my organizer hat on. This is when I put my ideas into an order that makes sense. To do this, I often write headings in my word processor for major sections, and then I write quick sentences under these sections which will become the main ideas of my paragraphs. I then step back and reorganize my sections and paragraphs by copy-pasting them in different places until the text's organization makes the most sense. When I'm happy with the flow of ideas, I finally start writing. I often struggle when writing because I can be overly critical of myself before words are even on the page, so I try hard to free write everything, meaning I fill in the sections as much as I can without taking out or changing ideas. After free writing, I'm faced with an organized but messily worded text that needs to be edited. This is when I let my critical self reword, move, and remove what I've written. It's important to note that I edit for different things. First, I look at ideas, then order, then sentences, and finally grammar. This is because it's a waste of time to polish my language if the ideas aren't sound and they'll need to be removed or rewritten. After going through this process, I usually can quickly create a first draft that needs a lot of revising but gets me to a place where I can imagine what my final text will look like. I can then go back to my initial research, mind maps, and examples and start to fill in the gaps in my first draft. The more time I give for my project, the more I can cycle through this process and tighten up my writing. Your process will look different than mine, but it's important that you have one that works. If you don't have a process that works well for you, you need to start creating one to be an effective learning designer. Once you have a written text, you need to go through it carefully to ensure that it maximizes learning. For example, are the most important concepts well articulated and easy to find, or are less important and less relevant ideas given precedence? If you feel you need to focus your reader more on these important ideas, there are a number of strategies you can use. For example, signaling important terms using headings, bolding, uppercase, color, underlines, and so on, or adding secondary elements for emphasis like quotes, captioned graphics, text boxes with definitions or examples, and so on. The final consideration that's often overlooked is writing style and voice. You need to read your text through the eyes of your reader while asking several questions. Is the language appropriately leveled for your audience? Is there jargon, slang, or technical language that should be removed or reworded? Are there important terms that need to be defined? And are terms used consistently? These types of questions can help you find places in your text that might confuse your reader, so rereading your text or having a reviewer look for these issues can significantly improve the accessibility of your text. Another tip for writing style is keeping it simple. Academic writing is often needlessly complicated and hard to understand. Unfortunately, learning to write in an academic institution may in fact make your writing style less accessible. When you're writing for learning, you need to make things as simple to understand as you can. There are several strategies you can use to simplify your writing style. For example, use fewer words to say the same thing. Use smaller words to say the same thing. Leave information out that isn't important. And convey information without using words, for example with illustrations. A few tricks to reduce needless language is to not use passive voice or nominalizations. Passive voice is when the subject of a sentence follows the verb, for example with the sentence, "The book was written by me." Instead, I can just say, "I wrote the book," and use fewer words. Nominalization is when a verb, adjective, or adverb is turned into a noun, for example with the sentence, "They achieved drug legalization." Instead, they can just say, "They legalized drugs." Once our text is written, we need to carefully edit it to make sure it meets publication standards. We'll now talk about the different levels of editing and guidelines we can use to improve our texts. If you're writing for a publisher or a larger organization, you may be working with another person who is in charge of editing your text. There are different types of editors you may encounter in the publication process, for example, the substantive editor, the mechanical editor, and the proofreader. The substantive editor is also called a developmental or structural editor, and their task is to work with the author throughout the project. They support such things as the author's goals, the project's ongoing development, and the organization and structure of the text. When the text is written, it is then sent to the mechanical editor, who is also called the copy editor. They review the text for grammar, spelling, punctuation, and style issues. Lastly, after the copy-edited text has gone through layout and design, it is given to a proofreader to catch any final mistakes or design errors. If you're writing for a publication, they'll likely give you guidelines to follow to ensure that your submission meets their writing standards. You'll likely have experience writing papers that follow academic style guidelines like MLA, Chicago, or APA. This has given you practice that will help you meet the writing standards of academic publications. Some publications may have their own writing style guides to help you with your writing, so asking about submission guidelines is a good idea before you start your project. Even if you self-publish, you'll need to review the submission guidelines of the places you plan to sell your book or ebook. Amazon.com, for example, might reject your ebook if it doesn't meet their requirements. Lastly, we need to take our edited text and get it ready for publication. We'll now discuss how we can do this, paying particular attention to how we can get our work reviewed and the various file formats we need to work with. Getting your work reviewed by a trusted third party can be an important step before publication. A reviewer can truly look through the eyes of a new reader who isn't involved with your project and critique your work with a fresh perspective. It's important that you're willing to accept criticism and incorporate their comments into your work, even if you're at a later stage in the writing and editing process. I know from my experience as a student and as a teacher that accepting criticism can sometimes be difficult, but good feedback from a trusted person can be invaluable. Regarding file formats, the submission requirements of the publisher, printer, or seller will identify the file formats you need to submit to them. If you're creating your own ebook, you'll need to either create your own ebook in an acceptable format like EPUB, MOBI, or PDF, or use a third-party service that will adapt your book into these different formats. If you're self-publishing with a printer, you'll likely need to send them a PDF file unless you're using software like Bookwrite, which can publish your book for you. If you're working with a publisher, they'll likely ask for a word processing file that will be sent to editors and designers. In addition to the various types of texts we might encounter as learning designers, we also learn several important considerations designers must make when working through the various stages of designing a text. You should be able to develop your own design process as you get more practice creating text-based learning objects. But this introduction will help you get started with the learning objects assigned for this course. Your tasks now are to review the resources in the course site under this topic and begin working with the various software titles suggested in the course site to design and complete your ebook entry. Your ebook is the most complicated learning object in this course due to the different software titles you'll need to work with, so make sure that you work steadily on your project to work through any problems that you might encounter. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you're struggling with assignments or content related to this topic and have questions for me, please don't hesitate to email.